Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. For those of you who don't know us, we're the sisters, Amy and Nancy Harrington, the founders of the Passionistas Project. And welcome to Before and Beyond Project 2025. How did we get here? With Dr. Melissa Bird and Crystal Lenise Walker. For those of you who are new to this community, we wanted to give you a little overview of what we do. We've created an inclusive sisterhood where passion-driven women come to get support, find their purpose, and feel empowered to transform their lives and change the world. We do this with our podcast, annual Women's Equity Summit, and in this community. Here, women and gender nonconforming, non-binary people from marginalized communities can come and be their authentic selves, share their unfiltered stories, make lasting connections, find resources, and get educated on topics in the areas of business development, personal growth, and social impact.
So a lot of you have already started the Stop Project 2025 course. If you haven't, we are in week 1 and you are welcome to start it at your own pace. We personally became aware of Project 2025 in the early spring. We'd heard rumblings about it, but Red Wine and Blue, which is an organization that I know a lot of you are a part of, and Trouble Nation, they really opened our eyes to it. And we realized that we needed to educate ourselves. And we wanted to then give our knowledge to all of you. So we started to do research. And we realized that at that point, there weren't a lot of people talking about the details. So the in-depth course that we created is kind of an overview of the proposed policies in Project 2025, the organizations involved, the 4 pillars on which it's built, and some of the goals of things they want to take away, like women's reproductive rights and healthcare, persecuting LGBTQ people, encouraging racial discrimination, and obviously so much more. So in addition to the Project 2025 course, we've also set up a Project 2025 chat space where you can all connect with each other, where we're posting updates, where our experts like Dr. Bird and Crystal can communicate with you, and where we're kind of talking about the election and political issues in general. So, regardless of who wins the election in November, there are going to be politicians at every level of the government working to implement the policies of Project 2025, which is why we've asked Dr. Bird and Crystal to be here.
So Dr. Bird and Crystal are doing a 4-week live virtual series using Project 2025 as a springboard for our conversation. Each week, they'll ground their conversation in openness and willingness to learn. Rather than feeding the fear that Project 2025 evokes, they'll focus on building community because, as we all know, sisterhood is expansive. As a clairvoyant coach, author, and fiery public speaker, Dr. Melissa Bird has traveled around the world speaking to audiences at universities, conferences, and churches. Her combination of education, real-life experience, and practical advice, and a little bit of magic, makes her a powerful force of change in the lives of the people she speaks to. Past audience members have described her as fierce, revelatory, life-changing, enthusiastic, and inspirational.
And we totally agree that she is all of those things.
And more.
And so much more, yes.
Awesome.
And with over 15 years of experience in corporate diversity and inclusion, Crystal Lenise Walker is dedicated to creating inclusive spaces where everyone feels they belong. Outside of work, Crystal is passionate about women's liberation and empowering Black women to build thriving communities. Her interests include fashion, music, art, and DIY decorating. Whether it's crafting a new look or tackling a home project, she's all in. An audiobook enthusiast and tarot reading aficionado, she also has a deep love for documentaries on ancient civilizations. She believes in living life boldly, creatively, and with a heart full of purpose. So if you have any questions tonight, just drop them in the chat and we'll try to get them answered. You can also communicate again in the Stop Project 2025 course if things come up for you later or your questions don't get answered tonight. And with that, please welcome Dr. Melissa Bird and Crystal Lenise Walker.
Yay!
Hello, thank you. Thank you so much. We're super excited.
So excited you're here.
Crystal, do you want to go first?
I'll let you kick this one off.
All right. Okay. So, welcome everybody. We're so glad you're here. Crystal and we met several years ago. It feels like 300 lifetimes ago, honestly. It was like at the beginning of the pandemic, and Crystal and I were doing there was a group of people in the Pacific Northwest who put together a conversation with Black and Indigenous women to talk to white women about racism. And Crystal and I both spoke at that event, and it created this friendship where we come together. We've done a couple of interviews for my YouTube channel, and also a couple of conversations where we come together and really challenge each other to talk about, to have conversations that are grounded in an openness and a willingness to learn. And one of the things that we're hoping with the next 4 weeks is to really allow us to have the opportunity to move away from feeding the fear of what could happen um, should a Trump presidency occur and Project 2025 be put in full effect, and really talk about how this is actually just a different iteration of white supremacy. And Crystal and I are going to get into how this has always been happening. This isn't new. It's happened since colonization. And so and also really get us grounded in this idea of sisterhood and community and how we can come together. And so in that vein, one of the things that Crystal and I have talked about before is how to choose your lane and stay in it, and signal politely when you want to move over. And so there are three things that we really want to get into today. One is where you can have the biggest impact by choosing your lane. And remembering that even as we are, even when you're driving, we don't have to be in all the lanes, that it's okay for us to focus on a lane and really hone in on that. The second is to figure out where you bring the most value, and really to think about, as we are having this conversation of how Project 2025 is just a playbook of white supremacy, and that includes racism and ageism and all of these other issues, sexism, all the things, homophobia, transphobia, everything, and is also just a product of the colonized country that we live in. And so how can we figure out how to bring the most value without feeding the fear of what really Project 2025 stokes? And then the third thing is how not to cause harm with those who are not in your lane, and really talk about through the next several weeks about how not everybody has to be in our lane. And in fact, it is the diversity of our ideas and the way we think that can really help us address issues of white supremacy and colonization in this country. So that's the framework from which we're going to be operating. And Crystal and I just have a really good time talking. So hopefully this will be, we cause lots of good trouble. So Crystal, the first thing that I'm hoping that you will actually talk about tonight is this idea of being grounded in discomfort and being uncomfortable, and how we want to really encourage each other to be uncomfortable and be grounded in that.
Sure. So I think to start this off, when we talk about this idea of grounding yourself or even like choosing your lane, the first is to say you have decided to be a part of this for a reason. There was something, right, deep down in your heart, you got that icky feeling where you were like, I've got to make a move on this. Like, this isn't something that I can just sit on. Like, you felt that there was a need. And so one, you've already brought yourself to this space. And so in some degree, you've already chosen at least a highway, at least a direction that you want to, kind of ride this journey on. When we talk about grounding ourselves and choosing a lane, that only happens, and that concept comes from the understanding that this requires a communal and community and a collective space to do this work. No one person, no one issue, no one law, no one policy is going to unravel all of the things, the layers of complexity that we've stacked on from colonization through now, right? And not I think the Western idea of us, when we say one person can make a change, I think sometimes we take that a little too literally, that we have this idea that that means that that one person who made the change had to carry the weight. We can choose, people who have done wonderful things, who have changed this world, and we may attach that change to that person, but I promise you that they were not the only ones that were moving that train down the highway to get it to be that one person. And so one of the things that you have to recognize is, who do I want to be on this journey? Is the first question you have to ask yourself. The second one is, what role do I want to play in this journey? Right. And then the third one is an important question, is, where should I not be on this journey? And that question, I want you to put an asterisk behind, because it's not saying that I don't want to help move this forward. It means I shouldn't be in the driver's seat on this one. This one is more of a passenger princess type of ride for me. This is me in the back seat. This is me being the passenger, the co-pilot, to make sure that the pilot is okay, but this isn't going to be me driving that. And it's really key to ask yourself, especially with something like Project 2025 or politics in general, but as it relates to this, over 900 pages of information. And I'm sure that there were things that are out of those pages that brought you here. It wasn't, and collectively, you may be disgusted by all 900 pages, but there was something on one of those pages that made you feel like you needed to respond, you needed to prepare yourself, you needed to be more involved. And so as you're thinking about those kind of three questions, let's start thinking about this strategically. And this is the part that me and Melissa talk about a lot, right? And I like to look at, she and I are kind of like the yin and yang, because we both understand both the people, the empathy, the emotional drive that it takes to do this work, but we also understand the strategy piece, and we understand, when do I need to be pouring more or less of one of those two things into this, right? We cannot live off of our emotions alone. That's what burnout is, right? And oftentimes burnout comes from not having a clear strategy that had an end time for me or for you, right? It's because it seems like it's ongoing. So that's the other reason. Creating this kind of lane for yourself is also a way to practice self-care to yourself while you're trying to dismantle or respond or react or disrupt. You will burn yourself out if you never think there's an end point, right? There has to be an end point for you. So the other piece of that is defining, what does success look like for you? Right? It can't be hinged on, success for me looks like this person winning the election. It can't all be hinged on that. It can't be, my success is reading all 902 pages, right? Like if that's part of your success, that's part of it. But what are you going to define as saying, I was successful and what I wanted to contribute to this work? And so defining that for yourself also allows you to have a time where you know that there's going to be an end point. Now, that doesn't mean an end to your journey, your work, or what you're going to continue to do. It means that for this moment, what I'm driving in this moment, this is where I want it to land. And then you can pick up where you want to take that next piece. So I know we're like using this metaphor of lanes, and Melissa and I really like it because I'm a visual learner, but it's like choosing your car. When you go and choose your car, you have to choose the one that's right for you. Why do you want a coupe, a two-door? Do you need a minivan, right? Do you need a bus, right? Like whatever your needs are. And then it goes, what fits into my budget? What's affordable for me? What's practical for me? All of those things go into that. Think about this project from that same perspective. What parts of this project makes the most sense? Where can I do the most good, right? Because sometimes where we are the most driven or emotional about may not be the best place for you to be the driver in that seat, right? So a great example of that, I'll use myself. I am really good at being a strategist and thinking through, how do I create and develop processes that allow us to scale the impact that we want to have. I love doing that, right? But one of the things that was hard for me, I have volunteered and done some additional social impact work where I was on the ground, right? I was in college for this specific example, and we had developed this whole strategy on how we were going to actually support. It was right after Hurricane Katrina. The funny thing is, I was in the process of going up against Donald Trump at the time. This was pre-presidency. This was right. Like, so I guess it was an omen, I guess, now that I look back on it. But at the time, he was trying to purchase land in New Orleans, but this was the same land that they had declared as toxic, and they weren't allowing people who were the original homeowners of that land and those properties to go back to their homes. And we were like, well, if it's toxic, why would someone who's supposed to be smart and a billionaire make a decision to buy land that was toxic, that nobody could build on? That didn't make any sense. And so we had to go through this whole process to collect cases that we could document in order to send this to an appeal. So we were out there helping real lawyers. We were just students running around, but we were out there helping them. I realized then that that wasn't my strongest suit, because I boohooed and cried after every conversation and case study that I had. I could not let it go. Like, I would get fixated on this person and not, the bigger point was I need to collect their information so that I can get it as part of this case. But then I would get so caught up in trying to my empathy and what I wanted to do. Now I'm trying to help them connect with social services, and I'm trying to do all of this other stuff, but that wasn't what I was there for. Right. And I realized that I only got 2 cases done when everyone else around me was getting 10 to 15. And we needed as many cases as possible, and we needed to document as much as possible. I was not the right person to drive those interviews. I was the right person to develop the questions that we needed for the interviews. And I was the right person to understand the logistics of where we needed to conduct those interviews and thinking about where it was going to be most accessible to the people and the impact that they were experiencing. My job was not the case studies. And I realized that I had to back out of that, because that was a place where I was actually slowing down our progress, not with malicious intent, not because I didn't know what I was doing, which we can always feel that way, that we have to, just because I know I can, didn't mean I should have. And so that's an example of when you're choosing your lane and you're grounding yourself. And I realized, like, every one of us had a piece in that. And I was much better on the strategy part. And then I was also much better transcribing all of it and writing it up in a way that it needed to be. I cried over the stories, but I didn't have time to get attached, and I didn't have a person in front of me that made it hard to stay focused. So that's where we're talking about that grounding yourself. Don't overwhelm yourself. You can only handle but so much. And so think through what that is.
One of the things I love so much about what you're saying, Crystal, because of the enormity, and I think this is with intention, right? The Heritage Foundation has been around for a very, very, very long time. It is in response to a series of things that happened post World War II. The Heritage Foundation is in response to women having access to birth control. It's in response to women having access to abortion. It's in response to education and religion and changing tides, right? And so one of the things I really love about what you're saying, Crystal, is really thinking about how our involvement also changes over time. So there are only, while I sit at all of the intersections, I mean, I'm Native, married to a disabled veteran, I'm bisexual, I'm a woman, I am raising someone else's children who happen to be Jewish. Like, I'm sitting at, I'm a small business owner. I mean, I could pick 3,000 different intersections of which I sit within that project. And it's about really this idea of figuring out where we can have the biggest impact is really about following and paying attention to that. Like you said, I'm really good at this, I'm not so good at this. Because what that actually does is it creates space within our communities for someone to fill that role that we're not exceptionally good at or well suited for. And I love what you're saying about really encouraging people to think about what success does look like, because when it comes to something this big, it and I would love to talk, I mean, as a Native person um who is often accused, I've often heard, I'm too native to be white and too white to be native, right? Like there are places while I was growing up that created a lot of disconnect for me and a lot of harm for me. That one of the things that I think is, as we're moving through Project 2025 through this course and also through these conversations, is that just because we know that I mean, all of us who are here and all of us who are listening to this and all of us who are educating ourselves about these things, what we are doing is talking about disrupting a 500-year-old system. We're not taught, this is not going to change overnight. And this is a conversation I have often with my children, that 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 it took us 500 years to get here. It's not going to happen within 1 or 2 election cycles. And that this is a constant conversation, that if we are in the wrong lane, or we're trying to be involved in too many things, and we get wrapped up in the spaces where we are not open, where we can feel ourselves shutting down, then what happens is that we can cause harm to ourselves and other people. And I'm curious, Crystal, when you think about we talked before, you and I have talked about the economic impact of Project 2025, that this isn't just about the concentration camps. It's not just about annihilating the ADA and making it impossible for people with disabilities to get services. It's not just about the Department of Education. It's about the economic impact, particularly for women and people of color, right?
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, when you think about this idea of bringing the most value, and this idea of being grounded and rooted in where we can serve best, what are some thoughts that you have about sitting in your own identity and allowing for that expansiveness to take place?
Mm. So all of us, from a social perspective, because a lot of the issues that we're dealing with are social constructs that were created, and now we're going from a social construct to where it's becoming a law, which makes it a very tangible thing. But every one of us, if we had the opportunity to just sit a moment with ourselves, kind of what you were talking about earlier, about the different intersections of your life and all of the complexities that make us who we are, we could all sit down and very easily write down 2 lists. Where do I have privilege in this society, in this operational perspective that we have in this country? And it might be even in the world, but if we're looking at specifically the impact, if you start writing that list of what privileges do I have and what are those privileges attached to? And then you start also looking at where do I have disadvantages, right? There will be some people that privileges list might be longer than disadvantages. There are going to be some that disadvantages list are longer than your privilege. But the reason I say you do that is that if you start mapping this out to Project 2025 and even broader out, to your point, right, going and looking at how all of these things map out, what are they trying to do in that particular area? I said to Melissa earlier, if you start finding out why they're doing this and how you're connected to it, then you start following the money. One thing about the US is that we are still a capitalistic society. And a lot of the reason in which white supremacy stems from, in order to hold power, you need money. Now, money and currency looks like whatever we create. So if it's gold bars or a silver coin or a piece of paper with a dollar bill on it, that's what we have created value to. And every one of those things come with an actual tangible cost, right? They come with an actual tangible dollar amount cost, right? The reason that we're fighting against universal health care is not because they actually don't believe that people should have a right to have health care. They just don't think that our tax dollars should be used universally to do so, right? They just think that you should give your dollars to our government and still then take care of yourself with little to no government involvement to manage how your money gets spent, right? Follow the money. And then the next key is that where does that money now go to? Because if you're slashing things, right, so that you don't have to pay for things, right? So yes, is it about our rights? Is it about our access? Yes, but it is also about money. And one of the ways to have control is through controlling currency and what that currency can do and what it can afford for you. And although I often talk about, and there's research and there's data that proves that our country has become more diverse, right? And that a lot of the response to Project 2025, or even more specifically post slavery, thinking about the laws that have been passed since then up until now, it was never about the individual humans. It was about the money and the value in which that work was attached to it.
Yeah.
And that is what they're chasing, is the couple of money with power. And I think if we start thinking through this a little bit more and look at following that trail, we'll really find out what is the long-term end game of this. Because I think what can happen when you're reading this and reading other reports, it can be like, well, why would anybody want to do that? What good does it serve? Again, it's that economic impact. And one of the other things I would say about the economic impact is that this is not in totality in response to just our country becoming more diverse, right? It was in response to who has money, right? Women are making, despite being behind the curveball, and pay equity date is at different points of the year for women, for Black women, for Indigenous women, for Latino women, it's all different dates and pushed out even further in the year, right? But why are women making more money? Well, one, because we've had more choices over our bodies and how we wanted to live our lives to do so. We had access to medical care that allowed us to delay having a child if we wanted to. It allowed us, right, to get mental health care for illnesses that were just women problems before, when we knew that scientifically we needed support for. Education allowed us to get degrees that were the equivalent to men, which meant that they had to compete with us to get the job, which is why women are part of this concept of a DEI hire. It's because they don't want the money to be shared. Right. And so what better way, right, to reverse and take down women is removing all of the ways in which we've leveraged access, despite having barriers and despite putting up things every year. There's a new fight. We still have made progress with our money, because they recognize, because historically they have treated, if you've got money, you've got power. Well, now, if other people are getting money, then that means that that power might have to shift and follow. So it is less about us as human beings as it is about who has money. Black women have been historically, over the last 10 years, gaining when it comes to education and earning education and higher education, which means that Black women's earning power, right, has grown exponentially over the last 10 years, despite still being behind, but has grown exponentially. Buying power has changed. They don't want to share that power,
No.
right? If now all of us can afford to go to the country club, it's not a boys' club anymore. We're all in the club and we're all playing golf and we're all going to hear your conversations, right? We're all going to go to this store. We all can afford to go to this restaurant where you're having these conversations, right? That's the other thing, is that power and money has allowed people to play in our faces, right? You can have this conversation 3 doors down from me, because that's not a place that I can afford to listen to the conversation. But now if I have money, I have access to that same conversation in a way that you never imagined that I should have had that opportunity. And so that's where I see the economic impact is. This is trying to reverse the economic impact and the power that it can have for women. Even more importantly, when women collectively come together in groups like this and beyond, and build true community with multiculturalism in mind, which is where they don't want us to. Yeah. Then
I mean, I feel like we should be flattered that they are so terrified. Like
I mean, shouldn't they?
A 900-page document. Like, y'all are scared. Like, bless your hearts.
That was a lot of work.
That's a lot of work,
But
right?
also, I will say this, and this isn't to diminish what this does. I appreciate the compactness of 900 pages for all your stuff in one place.
Right.
Now I do not have to go all over and try to listen to every one of your local rallies. I don't have to go and figure out every individual judge that you've appointed. I don't have to try to play Where the World is Carmen Sandiego and trying to figure out where this case is headed. All of this stuff is in one place, which also makes it easier for me to pick my lane. I can be well-informed, well-educated on all of the ways that it's going to impact me, but I can now better choose a lane that I am best suited for.
I think that there's two things this brings up for me. And just to let y'all know, we're gonna leave some time at the end of this for conversation and questions and any of that stuff. But if you do have questions too, feel free to drop them in the chat. But or thoughts. There's two things that there in the idea and the notion, of course, that thanks for putting it all in one place. There's two things that really strike me. One is that one of the things I'm noticing a lot of is that when people get overwhelmed, they fall right into cancel culture, right? They get all the way over, they do not signal, they move over 3 lanes, they have road rage, they're very much in the way, and they get involved in this, no, you're wrong. Actually, I am right and you are wrong. They get very definitive about opinions, right? And one of the things that really strikes me because of them laying it all out is that my hope is that all of us, my message to everyone listening to this is to try and catch yourself when you're getting all wrapped up in the emotion of no, 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 this is how it is. Because one of the things that I've learned as an activist and a a social worker and a public speaker and someone who's done this work for a long time is that we all have a voice, even if we disagree with the voice. And that's the beauty of us all being here on the planet at the same time. There's a reason it was illegal for 3 or more women to be in a room unescorted by a man for years, millennia, right? Like hundreds of years that was illegal. And it was illegal because when we get together in a group and start having conversations, even if we don't agree exactly, change happens, things shift. We start to think about the communal weaving of our communities. And we start to think about how our ideas impact each other's families, even if our families don't look the same or our ideas aren't exactly the same. And so one of the things that I'm hoping we can do over these coming weeks and we can take as a ripple effect out into the world is to really think about, where am I getting so riled up and definitive and either or and very rigid in my thinking? What am I afraid of? What is being brought up for me? How can I take a step back and breathe through the feelings I'm having and really think about, what is it like? What does success look like to me, for example, or how can I move back over into my lane so I can focus on the things that light me up and make me excited? The other thing that I want to, that when you were talking, I was thinking about is that this is not just a federal issue. This is local. All politics are local, and the politics start with our bodies. Our very body is the most local political scene that exists. And I've recently been learning, my husband is a fisheries observer in the Bering Sea, and he's been having me read books that are making me very uncomfortable. I don't read books about fish because I could give half a shit about fish, honestly, but my husband loves
Unless they're on a plate, but that's
unless
also
they're on a
because
plate, which I hope someday to be growing fishes on a farm. But so I'm listening to this book called Cod, which all y'all who know me know I would never listen to a biography of Cod. Okay. But he wanted me to listen to it, so I did, because I'm a good human. And but what was horrifying about this book is that it tells the story of cod and cod fishing. Well, when the colonizers came here, you could walk. The book literally describes it as diary said you could walk on the fish. There were so many fish on the eastern seaboard, you could walk on the fish. And what happened is they needed to create a food source for the slaves in the West Indies. And so they took that cod and they salted that cod and they sent it down to the West Indies and they exchanged it for molasses. And it became the food source of slavery. And what happened is they decimated the cod. right? And so the cod population started to decrease as they colonized the cod. And it became a problem because they didn't have the food source for the slaves. And what struck me so deeply is that that is still a story. The idea that abundance should be extracted, which is what Project 2025 is all about. When we think about people with disabilities having more resources and being held up, which is what we're going to talk about next week, just to your point, Crystal, people with disabilities, people of color, immigrants, all are rising because of the structure of this country. Even if it's not as quickly as everybody else, it still is happening. And that is terrifying because you cannot colonize a people or own a people if they are able to rise up against you. It's impossible. And so it's this also Project 2025 is woven into the very fabric of this entire democracy. And I want people to remember that as you're moving through this process of excavating it, because what this means is that when we get overwhelmed, if we go back to just breathing, grounding, feeling our feet on the floor and going, okay, what's the next best thing for me to do? What's the next best thing that I can do? What is the conversation that I can have? Then what happens is that ripples out to our friends and our family and the people that we're talking to about these very simple yet complicated issues. Because I'm not gonna fix all of this. I'm just not. I'm just one human being sitting, like you said earlier, Crystal, like, sure, I can make a difference in the world, and I tend to, and I'm just one person. And so if we allow ourselves to be that person woven in with the collective, then what happens is we remember that no matter what, our feelings, our thoughts, the statements that we make about these things can, when we come from that space of rootedness and groundedness, we don't get so overwhelmed. And when we connect that to nature and our natural way of being, because we are of nature, we're not separate and above nature. We are of the planet. We are of the earth. We are woven with those cod from 500 years ago. That it's woven into us. And if we can remember those things, then what happens is we start to bring the most value when it comes to Project 2025 and disrupting and dismantling this conversation. Because Project 2025 will be in our school boards. It's going to be in our city councils. It's going to be in our county governments. This is not about the federal government. It's going to be used as a model to infiltrate every single level of this system that was created based on colonization and white supremacy.
I think there was something you said that really struck me when you talked about how it's going to permeate through all of our governmental branches and levels. And we've already made it clear that Project 2025 is just a culmination and a playbook that they've kind of given us of work that has been happening, again, post-slavery. And it's been called different things. It's been called different iterations. Some of these laws are exactly the same as they were written 75 years ago. They're just trying to get it back to where it was. They like that version of it. But one of the things, and I have this question to you, Missy, and I think just kind of to everyone, I've seen us do this work in different places and finding different lanes and how we've both had to challenge each other and learning various things. But one challenge of a question that I have for you all, and Missy, even you thinking about it for yourself, are you committed to dismantling or stopping Project 2025? Or are you truly committed to helping rebuild and create inclusive systems moving forward? Because I think that those are two very distinctive things. And it does not mean that either one of those is right or wrong. But I think that it is important that you understand that distinction, because stopping Project 2025 is a very real and urgent response needed, but that is short term. Long term, right, is building new inclusive systems. And as we think about what got us here, there is a level of complicitness that several of us have had, all of us have had at varying degrees and about varying things.
Mhm.
And what has happened in our political system, which founding fathers warned about a two-party system and what it could create, we start cherry picking pieces of legislation that concern us as individuals without looking at the bigger and larger connectivity to how it was impacting everyone and not just our singular family, and just having that tunnel lens, which then leads to then having very complicated mess that you're uncomfortable in response to Project 2025. And what I mean by that, for example, is that if what is happening to women's bodies and women's rights is one of the things that drove you here, you may have been complicit in the anti-racism or the lack of anti-racism legislation that was actually going in. But now all of those things are grouped together. So are you here just to stop Project 2025, and then you're just going to pick up fighting in your one lane, but also actively not assisting and also being passively okay with other areas? Or are you saying, I may have to change some of the views that I had before I came in here on other areas or issues that I didn't think had anything to do with me? Because I think that has a lot to do with where your grounding is going to come from and how you ground yourself and what that looks like. There may be some things in Project 2025 that may have made you uncomfortable to want to agree to or to allow. You need to ask yourself why. Right? Because what's happened is we've kind of picked our way through, and now we're all kind of at a place of kind of a collective reckoning about the nuances that make us human. It doesn't mean that, hey, I've got to like dismantle and hate every single page and every single thing, right? But it means that we're complicated and we're nuanced and thinking for yourself. Am I here to stop Project 2025? Or am I trying to build inclusive communities and legislation that impacts everyone for the better and creates the least amount of harm? It's okay to be in either one of those, but I think that that's a reality that you need to come to for yourself, so that one, you can still practice self-care in those spaces, because in a community, you're not always going to agree. And so now is also the right time for you to understand, what am I fighting for out of this? And what am I not? Right? What am I okay with? What am I not okay with? Be honest with yourself about all of those things, because if you're coming together in community, right, to just stop it, then that's one thing. But if you are saying, I want to be a part of a larger, longer term, then you have to do some more grounding and work in that.
And I also think too, that one of the things I love about that is that my hope is that Project 2025 can compel all of us to change systems and to look at how, and to be okay with the idea of the democracy that was built with the literal term in the Declaration of Independence, using merciless Indian savages, which is one of my most favorite t-shirts to wear on Thanksgiving, and also Indigenous Peoples Day.
You're gonna say, what Thanksgiving? But okay.
like what? No, I and July 4th, like I use it often. But how can we be okay with the idea that some of these systems are going to have to be destroyed? Some of them are going to, the current iteration of our democracy as it stands is built on the idea of slavery and colonization. And that is how it has existed, and that's why it's falling apart. That's why it is crumbling. That's why the experiment is falling down, because it's not meant to last forever. And that's okay. And so how can for many people, Project 2025 is the moment where they have gone, oh shit. And so how can that really compel us to change systems and shift the way we are operating within our own spaces and in our own communities? So thank you for that, Crystal, because I think that's a really, really, really fantastic question. So we have about 15 minutes left. So I would really, really love to open it up to people. If you have questions or comments or thoughts about what we've been talking about so far.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Hi,
Okay.
Laura. How are you?
Okay.
Good.
I think I can say that I'm in it for the long haul.
Mhm.
I don't believe the ideology behind 2025 is going away anytime soon.
Mhm.
We're based in a society of slavery and racism and all these things that have never been addressed. So our country needs a lot of work. And whether or not Harris wins, this will continue for a very long time.
Yeah.
So I'm in it for the long haul for my grandkids. So
Thank you, Laura.
um,
That reminds me of something that in Native culture is prevalent across Native cultures, and it is about thinking 7 generations ahead. So um for us, the every decision that we make is not made just with our children or grandchildren in mind, but it is with 7 generations ahead, and we walk with the 7 generations before us within us. And and so that is a really, I think that it's such a profound thing to think about, Laura. As you said, I'm in this for my grandchildren, right? Like, if we can start thinking 7 generations before us and behind us, what does the world start to look like when we think about what the legacy that we're leaving for people? And I just think that's so important. So thank you for saying that.
and the other thing is what's offensive for me in 2025 is the mass deportations.
Yeah.
This is not a new concept. We've already been through Project Wetback, where they deported 1.5 million Latinos. Now, I think that mass deportation is going to include all brown people.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of people that have joined in on this now had no complaints when Trump was separating the children, had no complaints when he talked about the racists and the criminals that were crossing the border. There wasn't an outcry. And what I was really appalled at when they were separating the children from their parents at the border, I called the Jewish Federation for their stand.
Yeah.
And they didn't take one.
No.
I was fucking pissed.
Yeah.
But that's how I feel.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely correct. And also, I'm really glad you brought that up. There was a news story that came and went really fast where there was a Navajo man who got arrested and they were going to deport him in Arizona. And he was like, well, I was here before you. So, I mean, here's my card that says I'm an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. And I think that's going to happen more and more too. Right?
I think it's going to happen to a lot of groups.
I think it is too. I think it's going to be shocking for people, truly.
And with the thing with the mass deportations, they're talking about setting up a denaturalization unit.
Yeah.
So they're going to be reviewing naturalization documents.
Mhm.
And so they can deport you if you have had any kind of criminal activity. That could be jaywalking, that could be spitting on the sidewalk, whatever. And now it's come out that if you don't agree with the political philosophy of the day, so if you're not a Trumper, if you're not a Republican, if you're not a conservative, those are grounds for kicking you back to your quote homeland.
Yep.
So
Laura, you brought up such a poignant point, and one that is scary to think about. And when you talked about, that's how misinformation and stereotypes begin to change the way in which we listen and the way in which we read, right? Because that idea that this was happening specifically to Latino and the Hispanic community, when others knew that if there's always a test site, there's always a test community, there isn't anything that's in this project that hasn't been done on a small to medium or an attempt a larger scale at some point. It may not have happened nationwide, but it has always been tested, right? Like this, right? It doesn't come from no one place, knowing that there are so many scholars who forewarned us about this happening decades ago. You can go and read the work of Audre Lorde, Nina Simone. There are so many who have written work who were already like, if they do this. But what's also interesting when you talked about other countries, and it's going to be all encompassing of both Black and Brown communities, right? And I think there's also going to be the religious aspect that's going to be layered on that, even more so for other communities of color when we start looking at the intersection of that. But there's also this really interesting concept with white supremacy that immigration means Black and Brown. That if you are racially white but come from any other place, that you are not an immigrant. This somehow still belongs to you, right? And so again, like, this is part of a larger conversation as to who is supposed to belong here, right? Right. And you talked earlier about like the reckoning, like, when Melissa, you talk about Indigenous people, that's the one thing that they can't say, right? Indigenous people have already been here, right? And so the best that they felt like they could do was to relegate those communities into very specific areas and land and force them to get a card when they're not carrying cards, when none, right, aren't carrying cards. So it's going to be really interesting how that plays out. And I see this in the long term of what does that 7 generations look like then? Because one of the things that is interesting about that is, as a Black woman, I have experienced or heard people tell me to go back from where I came from, which is very othering, because if I'm Black American, I've always been here. And it wasn't voluntary. So it's still a concept that if you are not white, then you never belonged here, right? So like, even those of us who were Black Americans and were created here, Black Americans didn't exist until slavery, right? You still say that we should be going somewhere else. And so this idea of what it means, it's delusional sometimes, the idea that like, oh, America is diverse and we're built on immigrants, but not these immigrants. But if we take out these immigrants, then technically we're not a country of immigrants, right? We're all people that brought ourselves up from the bootstrap. Like, the narrative like changes depending on who they even call an immigrant. It's very interesting.
Yeah, so good. I want to get to Amy's question. Amy put in the chat, what advice do you have for people when it comes to picking their lane and defining what success looks like in activism when they are both passionate about so many topics and are in it for the long haul? My number one recommendation is to give yourself grace. So there are many things I am passionate about, but I have a foundation, and my foundation is always bodily autonomy. Always. That is the foundation from which I operate as a queer woman who is also pro-choice. And so that's my foundation. And I can pay attention to all these other things. But I think I'm gonna wrestle with this concept of long haul. This is a lifetime. These conversations are lifetime conversations. These are daily conversations. These are weekly conversations. These are monthly and yearly conversations. And I have one friend, my very best friend, who's known me for 50 years, our whole lives. And she says to me, I just wish you'd stop talking to me about these things. It's too overwhelming. And I say to her, you have brown children. As a white mom, I'm never going to stop talking about this with you. I know it's overwhelming. Imagine what it's like to be Lily and Jaden every single day in white bread Mormon Utah. Like remember that you get to choose as a white woman not to be overwhelmed, my love, but we don't have that same option every single day. And so it's not about being in it for the long haul. It's literally about being in it forever, for life. And so, and there are ebbs and flows, right? There are ebbs and flows to my activism. And sometimes it's way up and I'm all in and I'm totally engaged. And sometimes I'm in a corner reading a book and educating myself more about God, for hell's sakes. Like there are ebbs and flows to our activism. We're not always going to be on. And oh, by the way, can we please just for 5 fucking minute stop criticizing people who aren't out loud and screaming and yelling online? That is some serious white supremacist, sexist bullshit. That is patriarchal nonsense because nobody knows what's happening in each other's lives. Nobody. Because we keep that behind a closed door because for some of us, it's not even safe to talk about what's going on in our lives. And we have to remember that, that, that I honor and applaud people who are out there doing it every single day, but I am tired. And so I'm taking a little rest. And that is okay.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean we're not doing our part.
Yeah.
Crystal, I don't know if you have anything to add.
One kind of to the same point of Melissa, being in it for that lifetime, for that generation, it's also in thinking about how do you pass that passion on, right? It's not just in how I'm enacting my passion. So how do you get those grandchildren involved at a level that they can understand and still be proud of what they contributed? Because then they're going to pass that on, right? Like that's another way to do that. It doesn't always have to be the action for the rest of the world. It can also be thinking about how do I build this into my family's legacy on what we want our future to look like and what that does that look like for us. You know, as you're choosing your lane, also, like I said before, don't box yourself in, right? Like, and to have that kind of what is successful enough to me to say, I'm done with this for a moment. And yeah, taking a step back, right? Reading that book on COD is also the reason she was able to drop that gem on us about the connect. So here she was reading a book that she did not expect that to be a part of. And now she will be able to take that and use that somewhere else. She just gave that gem to us, right? So now I need to go read this book about COD. And
Oh my God.
and so that's one piece of advice. My other piece of advice really is no matter what it is that you choose to do, know that there's going to be a part that's active and a part that's passive. And both
Mhm.
of those things are so much needed from you. So that passive work would be reading some of that scholarly work that may be dismantling some of the personal thoughts that you thought you had, or listening to that podcast that makes you uncomfortable because you need to understand this other perspective. That's also doing the work because what you're unraveling, what you're learning will show back up when it's time for you to be more active. And when you ask like, how do you choose one? You don't have to choose one. You choose the ones that you can put and have the time in. And then what are other ways? So I may not be able to be nearly as active in my work on neurodiversity, but I then turn around and I support organizations when I am having money to donate. I make sure I give it to the spaces that I know are doing the most good. That's how I was able to support in that moment while I drove something else. So find the different ways to, you may be promoting your other passions and the other organizations on your social media as your way of getting it out there, even if you're not actively driving in that lane. That's okay.
I love that so much. And what that reminds me of is when I was the lobbyist for Planned Parenthood of Utah. Yes, I survived. And I was the lobbyist for Planned Parenthood of Utah. And one of the things that made me so much more effective was realizing that the people who were arguing against me were equally as passionate about their positioning as I am about mine. And so also in a weird way, like acknowledging that that conservative people are equally as passionate about things that we are, and that is just as important to acknowledge because that's where that shared humanity comes in. And we are all just people bumbling about on this planet trying to get from the speedy fast lane to the off ramp without hitting anything. And so I really, Crystal, thank you for this conversation. And thank you for all of you who are part of this conversation. And thanks for Amy and Nancy for creating the magical sisterhood of all the awesome things. And so we're going to be doing this weekly until the first week of September. And next week, we're going to talk about disability rights and grounding your passion to make an impact regarding disability rights and Project 2025. We're going to be here again at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And if you know anybody who's interested in joining the Passionistas Project Sisterhood, please tell them to join because it's awesome. And then there's a full schedule for weekly live events, which have been added to the chat, and also the link for you to invite other people to join the circle of magic, awesome, wonder, and delightful deliciousness is really what it is. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Everybody,
Thank
thanks for
you.
being here, everybody. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Dr. Bird.
You're welcome.
Thank you, guys.
We'll see you all next week, next Wednesday. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.